Bonjour, not au revoir. Thank you very much. That shows how much I'm bilingual. You were paying attention. No. Thank you. Bonjour. I'm Peter Rothstein. I'm the president of NECEC, the Northeast Clean Energy Council. Can people hear me in the back okay? Yep, good, thank you. So welcome to this session on enabling clean energy implementation through policy, technology, innovation, and finance. We put this panel together to represent the participants in the USA Pavilion here at La Galerie. There are three organizations who put this together: NECEC, my organization, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. Lisa Jacobson, who's going to be moderating our first panel, heads that up. I'll turn it to her in just a moment. And the U.S. Department of Energy has been the third collaborator in putting together this plenary session. And so we're very thankful for that collaboration. Let me just briefly say the format here. We actually will have three different segments. This is an hour-and-a-half plenary. It's three 30-minute panels. The first one is on policy, which we'll be kicking off in just a moment here. That's the overview of the organizations involved. The first section that I'm going to be turning over will be on policy. The second segment will be on innovation and technology. The third segment will be on the role of finance. So to get us going with this first segment, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Jacobson.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to have all of you, and I'm also very pleased to be kicking off this first segment focused on policy and how it impacts energy efficiency and deployment of clean generation. So my organization, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, is a trade association based in Washington, D.C., and we represent a broad portfolio of clean energy technologies. Not how sure that's going to go. Can you still hear me when I'm talking, or should I? No, okay, thank you. So my organization represents a broad coalition of clean energy companies and trade associations in the energy efficiency, renewable energy, and natural gas sectors. So being here at COP21, when the focus is on the portfolio of clean energy solutions that address climate through both mitigation and adaptation, is right in the sweet spot for my organization. I'd like to move straight into our panel, and first let me introduce the panelists to you. We have Catherine Clay, Vice President for Policy and Strategy at the American Gas Association. Next to her, we have Fiona Cousins, a Rupp Fellow and Board Chair-elect for the U.S. Green Building Council. Then we have Austin Blackman, Chief Energy, Environment and Open Space Manager at the City of Boston. Then we have David Cash, with the Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And then we have Grady Crosby, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Johnson Controls. We're going to explore what policy means in the energy sector and talk about it from this context here at the COP, as well as in the business world. So to get it started, I wanted to ask each one of our panelists to talk a little bit about their company or organization and how they fit in the energy sector at large. So to get us started, Catherine Clay, and yes, please use the microphone that's in front of you.
Can everyone hear me in the back? Yep, all right, great. Good afternoon. Thank you all for spending part of your afternoon here with us here on the BCSE Pavilion. We at the American Gas Association are a national trade association representing over 200 investor-owned utilities. So that's all of the privately owned or investor-owned natural gas delivery companies throughout the United States. And it surprises people often when I share with them that our member companies, those 200 companies, collectively in 2014 invested over $1.5 billion in energy efficiency programs. Well, why would natural gas companies be interested in programs that actually reduce sales of their product? And the reason is that in the United States, getting the right policy signals in place, getting the right market signals in place, has meant that our business structures are such that our revenues or our profitability is independent of the volume of gas. In other words, we're so-called decoupled. And the importance of that was a policy transition that began in the 1990s. And the importance of that is that it means that you don't have a contentiousness between the priorities of the business and the priorities of the environment. And what we see as important going forward is to continue that commitment to energy efficiency. And in particular, we believe that the use of natural gas in homes and in businesses directly, we're cognizant, delivers energy efficiency benefits inherently because you don't have those losses that are associated with generation and with transmission of the power. In fact, if you think about that full fuel cycle, for electricity, you end up losing about 60% of the units that come out of the ground if you start with natural gas and you trace that all the way from power generation and heat losses and transmission losses. If you instead use that natural gas directly in the home or businesses for home heating or water heating or other appliances, you get over 90% of those units of energy coming out of the ground being actually put towards the delivery of energy services. So while we all believe at AGA that we need to be mindful of, in the long term, deep decarbonization, in the next few decades, we believe that natural gas as a cost-effective, clean fuel can help us meet our climate goals more cost-efficiently, allowing us to use more of our financial resources for longer-term investments such as R&D and renewables. So because of that, we think that we fulfill an important near-term need, and we're encouraged that the national commitments that we're seeing from all of the countries, including from the United States, are going to push us all to invest in efficiency, push us towards other cost-effective measures to the extent that we can to reduce carbon. And the direct use of natural gas has an important role to play in that, and we stand ready to help make those contributions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Catherine. Fiona, could you just take a moment or two and talk about the U.S. Green Building Council and your role with it and how it fits in the energy sector?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My role is with the U.S. Green Building Council is as the incoming chair, and my technical background is at Arup, and I'm a mechanical engineer and designer and sustainability consultant that deals on both the building energy and the other side. The big thing that USGBC is doing in this area, though, is to do with market transformation. It's all about how do we get greener buildings within the space of one generation. So there are really two, and we've done a lot of that work through rating systems, through the ability to be able to measure and record what it is that people are actually doing and to make sure that they're doing it as well as they possibly can and better, and that they get some kind of credit in the market for that to happen. So there are really two areas, two rating systems that look at energy. The first of those is LEED, and the second one is PEER. LEED is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design System. It's been going for about 15 years, and its emphasis is on the design of buildings, and it's very much therefore for energy on the demand side. And this is important for energy policy because about 40% of energy is used in buildings and about 70% of electricity is used within buildings. So if you can get the energy demand in buildings down, you begin to really start to figure out how to use less energy or perhaps be able to build more or accommodate more people. The second part is PEER, which stands for Performance Excellence in Electricity Renewal. And it's really about the quality of the supply side and the way in which that can be made better. And the reason why this has become important is that there are all sorts of drivers towards fragmentation of the electrical grid. There are some technological ones. It's easier to do than it used to be. There are some regulatory ones, something to do with carbon reductions. There are some economic ones. It's very much cheaper than it used to be to create or to gather solar and wind energy. The price of PVs has come down something like 99% in the last 25 years, which makes it a much more economically attractive thing to want to do. And then there are some social drivers, which are things to do with resilience and to do with the reliability of the grid. And all of that is pushing people towards more and more distributed energy generation and more fragmentation of the grid. And what PEER does is it looks to measure how those microgrids can be properly put together. So there's really sort of 4 areas that PEER looks at, which I can't recite entirely from memory. One of them is to do with enabling customer action. One of them is to do with operational efficiency. One of them is to do with reliability, power quality, and safety. And the last one is about energy efficiency in the environment. So those 2 rating systems together allow us to look at both the supply side and the demand side for energy, and to begin to understand when people are doing things well and when people are doing things less well.
And next, we're going to hear from Austin Blackman. And in addition to talking about your work at the City of Boston, I'm going to give you a shout out. I hear you got a very prestigious award yesterday, so maybe you can share a little bit about that with us too.
Is this on? There we go. So thank you so much for the recognition and the opportunity to present today. I'm the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space for the City of Boston, so I'm responsible for Parks and Recreation, our main permitting body, as well as the Environment Department, where we recently updated the City of Boston's Climate Action Plan. And that's partially why we won the award earlier this week for a lot of the great work that we do to meet our goals for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We've got a goal of reducing those by 25% from a 2005 baseline by 2020 and by 80% by 2050. And in order to do that, we've got great programs in place, including Greenovate Boston, which is a program that we set up around the update of our climate action plan to really engage our community in new ways to make sure that we could track our progress as we were implementing our programs, to solicit the best ideas from the public, not just have a handful of community meetings, but to do so digitally. And that's really, frankly, changed the way that the City of Boston does planning, even outside of our climate action work, but also in transportation and our citywide plan that we've kicked off as well. Of course, we have a policy arm as well. We represent the towns in the state of Massachusetts on the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, and through that and also our work with our partners at the state, we make sure that we're trying to help the state accomplish its goals, which mirror the cities as well. Also, as many of you know, the city is really just responsible for a small portion of emissions that happen within our boundary. We've got about 321 buildings and about 1,000 vehicles. That makes up about 3% of the emissions in the city of Boston. So in order to accomplish our goals, it's really important that we partner with the business community and our residents. But in order to do that, we also really have to lead by example. On any given year, we are typically one of the largest electricity customers for our utility. And so it's really important that we also lead by example on a project basis as well. So we're looking at opportunities for our 321 buildings through the Renew Boston Trust, which is going to allow the City of Boston to do energy savings performance contracting to help us renovate our buildings and have the energy savings that are realized from those retrofits actually pay for those projects. We're also looking at ways that we can increase the amount of distributed generation that we have in the City of Boston, also through microgrids and making our grid more resilient. So in many ways, not just from a policy perspective, but also from leading on action, the City of Boston is involved in the energy challenges in the state of Massachusetts.
Thank you. And David Cash, it's excellent to have you on this panel, given, we are giving your current position, but maybe tell a little bit as well about some of your past experience and leadership in the state of Massachusetts on energy policy.
Great. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody, or as my body is feeling, good morning still. So I'm now the Dean of the McCormick School of Policy and Global Studies at UMass Boston, where, as many academics see themselves, we play a role in doing the kind of analysis and research that often underlies a lot of the policy that we're talking about writ large at COP21 now. But as was indicated, I spent the last 10 years in state government essentially completely reforming how we buy, sell, and regulate energy in Massachusetts. And we've had many other partners in other states. In Connecticut, I know Dan Esty is here, and Kelly Speaks Bachman is here from Maryland. But what I think one of the critical issues, and why Massachusetts was incredibly successful and has been by any measure 3 megawatts to 900 megawatts, 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from our power sector, #1 in energy efficiency. It's because we thought really carefully about linking the kind of larger scale policy to the nitty-gritty low-scale policy. And I would actually submit that Boston would never have won this award had it not been for Massachusetts government. And Massachusetts government would never reach the goals that I just outlined had it not been for the leadership of Boston. And the marrying and integration of the rules, the laws, the incentives, the array of integrated kinds of policies that made it possible for companies to grow, for renewable energy to be deployed, for cities and towns to be engaged. I just think that it wasn't just state government, it was municipal government, private sector, all came together to make sure that the higher level policies were integrated with lower scale policies. And if that didn't happen, as you might hear some stories later where governments did not necessarily put in the right kind of regulations, business could not take off in the way they can where that's been thought through. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And hopefully we can get into, my next set of questions are going to be a little bit more deeper dive into what policy matters. So that's really helpful kickoff for that. But we have Grady Crosby with Johnson Controls. Can you talk a little bit about Johnson Controls and your role with the company and how Johnson Controls fits into the energy sector?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
And I'm going to pull up a few slides while he's speaking.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank Lisa and the BCSE for inviting us here today. I guess you're wondering, how does Johnson Controls kind of fit into the mix, and especially based on the last slide, why is the Chief Diversity Officer for Johnson Controls here in this conversation? That's because the entire title wasn't quite there. I'm actually the Vice President of Public Affairs and the Chief Diversity Officer for Johnson Controls. And so in the Public Affairs group, I lead both our global sustainability efforts and initiatives, as well as our global government relations initiatives, as well as a number of other things, CSR and some things of that nature. But Johnson Controls is probably one of the largest companies that you've never heard of before. I say that because I talk to so many people who say, do you work for Johnson Controls? We really love your baby powder. But that's not us. That's Johnson & Johnson. Johnson Controls is really a global diversified technology and industrial company, a global multi-industrial company. We have 3 major lines of businesses along the line of automobile batteries and power storage and solutions. Secondly, a buildings efficiency business that helps customers be more efficient in their building and help them to really be able to regulate their energy usage and consumption, to be able to manage it more effectively. And then lastly, an automotive seating group that makes automotive seating components and a number of other things. Johnson Controls is a company that's over 100 years old. Actually, we were started about 130 years ago, founded by a gentleman by the name of Warren S. Johnson, whose first invention was an electric room thermostat. And so from that, our customers have, and that invention, by the way, helped our customers then save money and save energy. And since then, that's kind of been in our fabric. That's been in our DNA. And right now, we are a $37 billion company with about 130,000 employees globally. So that's Johnson Controls, Lisa.
No, thank you. So I gave everybody a sneak preview of what I was going to ask you next.
You did.
So I wanted to take an opportunity to go across the panel. I wanted to start with you, Grady, because you have some excellent visuals to accompany some of the examples of how policy is impacting deployment in some of the businesses that Johnson Controls in. And I thought it was a good way to kind of kick off this part of the conversation. So if I could, would you mind sharing with us, just a few examples from where you sit at Johnson Controls?
Absolutely. So we found that policy helps us out in a number of ways in our business. One, it helps our customers have access to some of the new technological advances, especially in this area of clean energy. And secondly, it also provides some facilitation of the innovation and research that goes into continuous improvement in the area of clean technology. So we start with talking about the vehicles and vehicle efficiency standards. And so most of the time you think of that as when governments and policymakers prescribe a certain consumption per hour, average miles per gallon that vehicle manufacturers have to comply with. So what that has done is caused the vehicle manufacturers to look at technologies that will cause their vehicles to be more efficient. And for us in the battery space, that has really kind of manifested itself in our advanced battery technology. So in Europe, we know we're very familiar with start-stop vehicles, and that's one of the things that's kind of catching on now in the United States. But start-stop vehicles in and of itself can save fuel consumption by anywhere from 5 to 8, and some would say even as much as 10%. What's really out there in the market mostly, or in the media mostly with regard to vehicles, is the hybrid vehicles. And so the hybrid vehicles is another a way that clean technology has been facilitated by policies. And so let's move on. The second one is our buildings business, and building codes and equipment standards have also facilitated this innovation and continuous improvement with regard to our products. And you can see by my chart, I'm just talking about on average since 1972 up to 2002, building standards have caused equipment to be just that much more efficient. You see by the gas furnace efficiency has improved by 25% over that time period, and you see for central air and then for refrigeration as well. So these are the ways that we continue to innovate when policy kind of forces manufacturers and forces the consumers to kind of think about how they get more energy efficient. And so here's another area where we actually have our buildings business combined with our batteries to come up with new distributed energy storage, which is a totally new policy area, Lisa.
Yeah, sorry, and I appreciate you. First of all, I really thought these were important because they show a diversity of technologies and what policy has done. But I know I had to rush you a little bit because we have a very short panel. I'd love to hear from some of the other speakers about how policy has impacted, your work and your ability to deploy clean energy. But we have about let me tell you, we got about 5 minutes left till we have to close. So let's do this quick so we can hopefully get in just a few comments on the nationally determined commitments that are being considered here. Thank you.
I'll chime in. I want to echo some of what we just heard about the importance of building codes and appliance efficiency standards. I'll leave you with a statistic to drive home how important that has been in the natural gas space. Over the last 40 years, we have seen natural gas service, the number of households that we are providing with natural gas, has increased by 40%. But the actual natural gas delivered has stayed flat for 40 years. So even though we've seen about 1% a year in growth in the number of hookups, the number of households that have been served by natural gas, and that's primarily driven by population growth, we've been able to drive energy efficiency, and that's all due to the leadership of local building codes, federal energy efficiency standards, and the like. So they work. We have further we can go, and we're continuing to work in our industry with our regulators to make that happen. But it's a 40-year track record of success in the United States.
I'll lead off of your comment on storage, which there are a variety of policies at different levels that are driving storage. But for many jurisdictions in the grid, the regulations aren't there yet. So for example, it's not clear how storage is treated on the ISO New England grid, the electric grid. Is it a generator as it's putting electricity back? Is it part of the transmission system? And these kind of nitty-gritty rules are going to make or break whether storage is going to take off or not. And again, that's why the call for integrating policies across scales is very important.
So I'm going to change tack a little bit and leave the storage question aside and talk a little bit about how some of the policies in energy for demand side begin to change. So the way that the codes are made in the US at the moment is largely around building a model building and then comparing what you think that your new building is going to make. And I think that policy is increasingly needs to shift towards actually measuring what the buildings are in fact using and then making sure that that gets properly reported. And we know that there are a number of cities where people are beginning to say you have to report your energy use for buildings over a certain size, and we're beginning to see that that's beginning to drive real changes in the amount of energy that's used. So that particular policy intervention seems to be pretty important on the demand side for buildings.
So I've got, what, 30 seconds?
No, we have a few more minutes. I've
All
built
right.
in a little cushion.
All
So
right.
Go ahead.
So for the city of Boston, I want to come back to the conversation about buildings and how do policies affect us. Large buildings and institutions make up about 50% of the emissions that are in the city of Boston. So it's a huge area of concern for us. The next largest area is transportation. We have a limited amount of control over those. So the state controls our building code. So one policy area that we really have to focus on in our coordination with the state is helping to improve that, to make our buildings more energy efficient as a requirement as we move forward. We're also looking at ways that we can leverage the zoning code as we update our citywide plan to affect that change as well, and also how the energy supply that we use affects that. How can we use distributed generation in ways that make our city more efficient also? But then also, since transportation is a huge part of it as well, our transportation plan as well as our citywide plan really are also focusing on ways that we can increase the number of housing units in the city of Boston, and then also increase the ways that we can really focus that development so that it's transit-oriented development, so we can have more people who live and work in the city of Boston, to reduce vehicles miles traveled and give them better access so that their commute times are going down. And all of these are policy concerns that we have that affect our residents on a daily basis.
Great. Well, thank you. Before we close, and we may not have time for everybody, but at least a couple of you to comment on the process here. Governments, 194 plus countries have come forward with basically action plans on energy, and both in the mitigation and adaptation space. So what does that mean from where you sit? Either from the business side or from local or state government. So anyone want to hop in and provide some thoughts?
I think it's remarkable, and I think many people are optimistic that an agreement is going to come, but those 194 commitments are not going to be realized if things are not taken into account at the subnational scale, at the city, local businesses, et cetera. And I think you'll see those countries succeed where they've done that cross-level integration of policy.
I couldn't agree more with David. I think that I'm very optimistic that we're going to have a great agreement coming out of Paris. I do not think that it will necessarily get us to the 2 degrees Celsius level. Also, it's not going to come into effect likely until 2020. So I think that between now and then, you'll see cities continuing the leadership that they've already taken to help us get to that point, and working through organizations like the C40, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. The city of Boston is proud that we'll be continuing to push the bar on that leadership.
Yep.
And I'll add that we also are very optimistic about seeing a positive outcome from Paris. Going with the action plans and the bottom-up approach was an inspired way to create a truly global framework for decision. And we're encouraged when we look at those individual action plans for nations that in most of the cases, they are not choosing technology winners and losers. They are setting the goal on a broad level for emissions and energy productivity. And that's the right way to send signals that will influence markets to move in the right direction, that can provide that broad umbrella for policies that will get us to those good outcomes in the most cost-effective manner possible so that we can achieve those goals by or earlier than the target dates. So that lack of specificity is actually a good thing. It's best when government doesn't pick winners and losers, and we're encouraged that the commitments lay out those broad goals and strategies.
So when I talk to my clients about what they have to do if they want to save energy or reduce carbon emissions, the thing that I always find myself saying is that you have to do a little bit of everything. So with that, I would absolutely echo what David says about the policy has to be loose enough that that you can innovate within it, but also it has to be broad enough that you know that you have to do a little piece of everything. You have to do some things on the supply side, you have to do some things on the demand side, you have to do some things with behavior, you have to do some things with policy, and you have to do some things with other kinds of motivation.
Great. Well, we've got about 30 seconds left, and I would like Grady Crosby to close it out for us. So Please
Thank
end
you,
with
Lisa,
your
so much.
comments.
Real quickly, I'm going to say something about harmonization that also is a lacking part. For instance, with the buildings in the U.S., whereas equipment and appliance standards are federal, building codes are regulated on the state level. So those states that have adopted more modern business codes in addition to the federal efficiency standards on equipment and appliances are really seeing the gains through this clean energy technology. And those that are lagging behind are not advancing as well. So harmonization needs to occur as well.
Yeah, I think, David, you really left us with a good takeaway theme. I mean, it has to follow through at all levels, and it's got to involve the business community and communities and other stakeholders. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in a real rapid-fire fashion. Well done.
Northeast. And very happy to be collaborating on this plenary today. So let me take a quick second and introduce our panel. This segment is on technology and innovation. And on this panel, we have all company executives who can talk about their specific companies, but also generalize about what that means. Because the theme of this overall session today, this plenary, is about the thriving clean energy industry that's growing very rapidly in the U.S., and how that connects to policy and finance and opportunities around the world, and reasons that we're all here in Paris this week. So let me quickly introduce our panelists. To my immediate left, to your left looking up at the stage, Gia Schneider heads up Natel Energy. I'll let her and all of our panelists introduce themselves. Next to her is Jeff Chapin, who heads up Next Step Living. Next to Jeff is Russ Carnahan, who heads up Ingenuity. Tom Price, one of the senior members of All Power Labs, and then Brian Elmore, who's part of the team at Harris Corporation. They're our panel for today, and I'm going to ask each of them to take a quick minute or two to describe a little bit about what they do and what that means in terms of the problem they're trying to address and a little bit about their solution in the space they're in. Gia, you want to kick us off? And actually, let me add, make sure that you're all using your mic, holding up close to as close as you can. And may I one other thing to add. For those of you who are tweeting, you've got both a hashtag and a handle up at the top, so we can all share our observations and conversation about what's going on here. Gia.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. My company is Natel Energy. We're based out in the San Francisco Bay Area in Alameda, California. And what we are doing is we're developing a new solution for hydropower. Hydropower is obviously an energy source that has been around for many years, for decades. And what motivated us was that if we're going to truly decarbonize and shift our energy supply, particularly our electricity generation supply, finding sources of baseload, renewable, emissions-free electricity is a really important path forward for us. And so we look at that and say, okay, there's biomass, geothermal, and hydropower. We decided to focus on hydro. And our approach is to shift the footprint of hydro to a distributed but still utility-scale sustainable solution. And that's started with innovating really on the hardware space, so coming up with a new turbine. We've been fortunate to have won some early support from our Department of Energy, which was critical in enabling us to go through the early engineering and product development to pilot. And we are now at commercial up to 1 megawatt individual turbine unit sizes. Just commissioned our first commercial project for Apple in Oregon, and are looking forward to doing a lot more.
Great, thank you, Gia. And Jeff.
My name is Jeff Chapin. I'm the CEO and chairman of Next Step Living. We are a residential energy efficiency and solar provider in New England. The problem we're trying to solve is that the residential sector is 21% of the carbon problem in the US, and there isn't a solution that easily and effectively allows people to make upgrades to their homes to do something in their own home. What we're doing for that is both, we have a small group of folks who go out and do assessments for homes and help people through the process, and we're also delivering a scalable solution, which is a software technology that we're going to be announcing soon, that allows people to see everything in their home and take action in a much easier way than prior. So we look forward to that. It's hopefully a utility scale solution.
Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Russ Carnahan. I'm co-founder with Ingenuity Worldwide, based in the state of Missouri. and really pleased to be here with this group and talk about an innovation in biomass. This really brought together the vast agricultural resources in the Midwest. We have enormous quantities of crop waste in the Midwest. We also happen to have some of the largest concentration of coal-fired power plants. So our inventor, Bob Hyman, and his wife, Nancy, she's the CEO. They've developed this technology that can densify, dry, and roast virtually any kind of biomass material, make it into a solid fuel that can be supplemented or co-fired with coal to meet emissions. And it's an important technology, not just in the Midwest. We've created a model with a farm group called ECAP of over 500 farmers in the center part of our state, along with our state's largest investor-owned utility, Ameren. And this is our Missouri model that we think can be replicated not just in the Midwest, but virtually anywhere where there are coal-fired power plants and access to those kind of raw materials. We think that's a breakthrough technology that can really make a difference as we're all trying to reach these global goals. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ross. And Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom. Let's see, is this on? I'm Tom Price with All Power Labs. We're based in Berkeley, California. We also work in biomass. We make something called a biomass gasifier. You can see one over there as our booth. It's a silver can-looking thing. Biomass gasification turns organic material like wood chips, nutshells, and corn cobs into on-demand, renewable, carbon-negative energy. Because the only waste byproduct that comes out of our machine when we're done is carbon or biochar, which can be put back into the ground. We export about 90% of what we make to the developing world for energy for productive use. So much conversation has been going on about lighting in the developing world, but once you get past lighting someone's home, you need a dense energy to run a tool, to make machines operate, to create economic value. Biomass gasification can fill that gap between a solar lantern and grid power to make affordable, renewable energy regardless of what the weather or other conditions are. And that's what we're doing at All Power in Berkeley.
Thank you, Tom. And Brian.
Thank you. I'm Brian Elmore with Harris Corp. I lead marketing efforts. And so we're a defense firm, aerospace and defense firm out of Melbourne, Florida, and about 23,000 employees. And we're covering customers in about 125 countries. So our environmental solutions group develops ground and airborne and space systems that provide weather and climate intelligence. And we provide this to decision makers and policy makers that protect life, property, and mitigate and adapt to climate change. And while we don't technically produce clean energy, we provide measurement and validation systems that enable the clean technology.
Thank you very much. So this group is all innovating with in a number of ways, many with technology, but also around business models. And our topic for this panel is about technology and innovation. I'd like for each of you to follow on you started to frame what you each do and the problem you're addressing. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your specific innovation, your specific technology, the innovation either on the technological or business model side. Gia, you want to kick us off again?
Okay, sure. So the specific technology that we are commercializing is an idea actually just as many things in renewable energy that was first thought of back in the first energy crisis. But it was not able to reach commercial scale at that time due to limitations primarily in materials and in certain elements of engineering. The big thing that has changed in the intervening couple decades is carbon for us, and it's a little bit unique to have a hydropower turbine that is largely has a huge amount of carbon in it. So the blades are carbon, the guide vanes are carbon, big chunk of the powertrain is actually carbon fiber based, and that's all enabled by major advancements specifically in carbon and advanced manufacturing, particularly in the last decade, and that's been a key element for us from an innovation perspective that has enabled making this technology something that can deliver 3 to 5 cent power at scale.
Great.
So Next Step Living is developing we've been in about 3,000 homes a month in New England doing energy efficiency and upgrades. And what we've realized is there are times when the policy environment does not work in terms of residential energy efficiency programs that are out there. How many people have ever done energy efficiency work on their home or household? So you're the converted, that's great. For a lot of people it's hard and they don't know what steps to take. So there are energy efficiency programs that utilities have set up in different states and around the world. But in the US, those programs are few and far between, and they also don't always achieve the policy objective in other states where sometimes changes to the policy limit scale. And without going into the details, we realized we wanted a way to scale and not rely on those programs entirely, to integrate them where they exist and where they're great, such as in Massachusetts, and we've heard about the great work in Massachusetts, but it doesn't exist in all other states. So what we've done is created a software system that allows you to see your home, see the opportunities you have for change, and then to very easily get projects up and running in your home and track those and track how your home's doing in one easy place. And we're very excited about this because it is a model that can scale without incentive programs. It is a market-based model, and we're looking at it for applications around the world, and specifically in Europe for in several cases for utilities that want to broaden the relationship they have with their customers. So instead of just billing more when it's cold, they can actually provide solutions for homeowners directly. So that's what we're working on.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Ross.
Thank you. Ingenuity Worldwide has developed a technology, and specifically, that can take virtually any kind of solid biomass and densify it, dry it, roast it, so it comes out as really that acts more like coal. In fact, it's been coined the term bio-coal. The process is called frictional carbonization, and so it really gives the unique ability to bring in biomass beyond just wood, which is the most common biomass used on the market today, and to look at those broader base of materials. And the other game changer with the technology, it allows to use existing coal-fired power plants to deliver renewable power to the grid at baseload. That's a big deal because those are paid-for assets, and they're going to have a lifetime, and they're going to have a shorter lifetime if they can't figure out a way to do it cleaner. So delivering that portion of biomass fuel to existing coal plants globally is a great way to address some of these issues, and we think it's a unique technology in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And Tom.
Our innovation is around two things, carbon and cost. First, carbon. We can cover the world with solar panels, but if we don't get carbon out of the atmosphere, we're not going to resolve climate change. And biomass gasification is a proven technology that can draw carbon out of the atmosphere and safely sequester it. The second is cost. Our equipment's about $1.30 a watt to install and can create electricity for as little as 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Next Wednesday, I'm leaving here to go to Liberia to install the second phase of a USAID project. That country has very limited energy infrastructure, and building capacity can be prohibitively expensive. But if you can build and deliver it for close to $1 a watt and make electricity for a dime, it's affordable enough to really drive transformative growth in those economies, and that's why we're focusing on that sector.
Thank you, Tom. Brian.
So at Harris, we specifically develop advanced technologies that measure CO2 and methane. And we do that with more precision than current techniques. For example, we have LiDAR technology that we developed with NASA, and we're flying up and down the east coast of the United States, monitoring these gases. So we've expanded that concept, and now we created a ground-based system that measures through the Department of Energy in support of them. We were measuring carbon sequestration sites for them. And by making it ground-based, we expect this to further adapt this technology to landfills, fracking sites, tailings ponds, and et cetera. And so through this, we feel like we can measure obviously better, and we can make true impact on major energy policy.
Great, thanks. So a couple of you have mentioned relationships, partnerships with government agencies, USAID, the Department of Energy, et cetera, and partnerships with government and partnerships with other parts of industry is a part of growing the clean energy industry. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about the kind of partnerships you either have or are looking to create, and what is it that, about the way the U.S. economy works that gives you opportunities to do that. So, Russ, why don't you get started? We'll start in the middle. We'll
Sure.
break the pattern.
Thank you. We had a key partner early on because one of the challenges of biomass is developing that supply chain and getting the feedstock where it needs to be and in the form it needs to be. So one of our key partners early on was USDA. From the ag sector, they were a vital partner from the government side, and our state government has also been a key partner in developing this. So it's very important. And then in terms of other partners, the technology is only as good as what you create in terms of that partnership. Having those end users of the technologies, we focused on utilities and people operating coal-fired power plants, and having those suppliers in place to be able to meet that demand. The technology sits in the middle of that space. So we've got to create that chain, and by showing that model, I think in Missouri, it's something we can replicate not just in other parts of the country, but globally.
I want to add something about the importance of government participation in something. It's noteworthy that 3 of the 5 people up here are in the Bay Area. It's a place of great innovation, but that innovation and the growth of the renewable energy industry in California has been driven and enabled by government policy, especially around financing and allowing capital to come to the table. For example, I think every one of us in the room has one of these objects in your pocket. They cost about $1,000, but you didn't pay $1,000 for it. The financing of this object is what's allowed its scale deployment. And the same too with especially emerging energy technologies. The ability to get financing enabled or credit guarantees to give comfort to these emerging technologies as they get into the market is critical to that early stage adoption.
Agreed. Go ahead, Chia.
One other thing I'd maybe just add for us, so we pretty much have 3 important categories of partnerships. Of the DOE, which I mentioned earlier, that's been incredibly important. As we started to go look at expanding on the international front, we also have then worked pretty closely with our U.S. Trade Development Agency, and they've been another kind of government entity that's been very, very helpful as we've looked at a few markets overseas. The other area of partnership for us is in our supply chain, and one of the things that we found, being in the U.S., which was a little interesting for us, is that, and was a little counter to our expectation, honestly, going into it, is that we have been able to get to a commercial product with a supply chain that is based 100% in the U.S. at this time. Now, as we expand and scale, we are going to have some of our supply chain in other parts of the world. That's undoubtedly true, but it was actually a very useful thing for us. We were able to leverage some of the other technologies in the U.S. in that supply chain. And then the third area of partnership, a very important area of partnership for us, is actually with what I would call kind of non-commercial or NGO stakeholders, particularly, again, because hydropower has a quite frankly, in some cases, a mixed track record when it comes to sustainability and how it fits into the concept of a sustainable energy plan. And so for us, working with American Rivers, Trout Unlimited, a couple other major NGOs who are active in this space has been incredibly important to understand how we design these projects, how we work with our customers, really, to design projects that are going to meet not just cost, but also sustainability criteria.
Great, thank you.
And
Yeah.
so Next Step Living has an array of over 400 community partnerships and such. The City of Boston, who was on the panel prior to this, helped us get started with a large contract buying, which was helpful, really helpful for us to raise initial funding. We've had state support in the efficiency and utility programs in Massachusetts. The New England Clean Energy Council, Peter, thank you. This has been a great organization for us to tell the story of Next Step Living, the jobs it creates, over 1,000 jobs that we've created with our partners as well, our subcontractors, and has been a real help for us to tell the good policy story. And in E2 and the NRDC, I'm here with both groups, and it's a great platform that they bring the business voice to the policy environment. So until more businesses start telling their story and getting in front of legislators that are working nearby here, who reached a draft agreement just recently, we heard, that's an incredibly important source of partnership. And then, of course, the utilities with whom we work who have good policy incentives. And we've learned where the policy incentives do not work well, it's not a help. So policy really is important. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks. Brian.
So Harris has a long history of working with the U.S. government on major contracts, but this is an example of us expanding beyond our traditional areas, and we're working with NOAA, NASA, Department of Energy, and then we've expanded now to Japan and the Japanese government, and of course, additionally South Korea. For this show, we actually came to Europe, and we're working specifically with entities in the city of Paris, such as universities, laboratories, and commercial partners here in town. So this has been a great opportunity for us to expand our reach.
That's great. Actually, I wanted to ask a quick follow-up on exactly that point about how each of you thinks about the opportunities for, as the clean energy industry and the clean energy markets are globalizing, or at least growing on a global basis at very different stages. How do you think about opportunities globally or internationally?
Well, specifically for us, 3 weeks ago, Harris deployed the Green Light product, which is what we're showing here. It's an adaptation of the DOE project and, of course, NASA. We took 2 lasers and we placed them on top of major office buildings here in town, and we scattered 15 reflectors around city buildings. The result is a 25 square kilometer net that we kind of cast over the city, and we were able to measure CO2 over the last 3 weeks. And during this week, this time of evaluation, we established daily patterns of traffic, of course, around traffic flows. But we also made a few discoveries. For example, we expected this morning to be very light traffic day and CO2 levels to be very low. And what we observed was actually a higher than normal elevation. And obviously, what we're extrapolating is it's likely because of the cold weather and furnaces burning in the city. So that was kind of an eye-opener. But then last week, we also had a day where we observed sustained levels of CO2 at 540 ppm, or parts per million, which is significantly higher than the 430 that we're seeing the last few weeks. And we had to do a lot of discovery and observation. And basically what happened is there were light dispersal winds and a heavy industrial activity in Southeast. So here we are, we have a 24-hour period of very high CO2 levels that typically are never noticed or certainly don't show up in traditional calculations. So it's been a real interesting understanding for us and how the carbon cycle occurs in a city life or day in the life of a city. So
An opportunity to be partnering with folks here. And you want to jump in quickly?
If you haven't seen this, go see it. Seeing live, real-time carbon emissions over the city of Paris is mind-blowing and a little spooky.
So I was going to ask the next question, if I could, which goes into, I think, exactly where. So you're all here in Paris at COP21. You're here. Well, tell us why you're here, because it's, there are customer opportunities. There's being able to have a business voice around the importance of climate and addressing new solutions. Tell us why you're here this week. Who wants to start us off?
Okay, I'll start. I'm here because about 7-8 years ago, I realized that the purpose of my life was to try to find some small contribution to climate change. We tackled the residential sector because it's 21% of the problem in the U.S., and we hadn't seen anyone doing it broadly and at scale well. And so we're trying to find that scalable solution that doesn't rely entirely on policy. And so for us, I don't think I'm surprising anyone by saying that Europe is ahead of the U.S. On these issues. And so there are a lot more utility incentives in the U.S. in Europe rather, where they have a much broader mindset about how to tackle these problems and how to develop their business and their business models. So for us, that's a great advantage, but it's also the real reason for us is to tell the story of what we've done. We've created hundreds and hundreds of jobs in New England, and this, with good policy, this can be replicated anywhere. The systems that are in place that allow that kind of growth are discoverable. David Cash, who was on this panel earlier, has a chart that shows that New England's index since 1990, from a whole range of policy measures, has both increased state GDP in a significant degree, increased employment at a time of growing population, and decreased the price of energy, the cost of energy, and the total greenhouse gas emissions. That New England experience since 1990 is something that should be replicated at least across the U.S. There's more progressive work going on in Europe, but for the U.S., that's an incredible track record for the Northeast. And that's part of what NECEC and E2 are also doing here to tell that story.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Ross.
Great. Being from the Midwest, I think people there have a strong belief that we should be good stewards of this planet. We're really pleased that the technology we've developed in the biomass sector brings together people across the spectrum, from farmers to people operating power plants, from environmentalists to scientists. I mean, we've got Democrats, Republicans, and we've got everybody in the room that sees value in this technology. But it was important to develop that, and important to know these things are only going to change if we have the right combination of policy change and technology. And so that's where I think this is such an important place for us to be. Even though we're a young 4-year-old company, we think this is an important place for us to be and be part of this global conversation.
Yeah, very much appreciate that. Chia?
Maybe
Go
just to add a little bit to that is that if we're going to address climate change, it does rely on technology and innovation, and that is going. And so for us, the goal for being here is that being a part of that conversation, showing how businesses are responsive to policy signals and are able to drive down the cost curve so that we are able to see solutions at scale that are cost effective is critical. And because it becomes a very virtuous cycle as you get proof points that show that policy is driving change, and then that feeds back into the policy signal, which then feeds back into business. And then finally for us on the international, the international market for us is where the growth is. So it makes sense to be here.
Yep. Great.
This panel for me reflects what's happening in the blue zone. There are the industrialized and the developing world. Energy poverty is going to end in our lifetime. It's going to end because everyone in the world, even the poorest people, now have one of these, which means they need electricity. It's going to come from a renewable resource, or it's going to come from a source that's going to ruin the planet. This is the inflection point that we're at, and the opportunity to share our ideas and other people's ideas about how we can sustainably develop and solve the twin challenges of energy access and climate change. That's why we're here.
Thanks. Brian.
For Harris, coming to Paris was an opportunity to expand into Europe, specifically in our climate area. We had, as I mentioned earlier, we're very well known in the U.S., and then we've made great extensions into Asia. But the climate business is a huge expansion of our weather business that we have over 60 years of experience in, and so the build up towards COP21, the road to COP21, just basically forced us to be here because of the excitement.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would just, I guess, add one quick comment from my prerogative as moderator. As president of the Northeast Clean Energy Council, the reason we're here at COP, I think it echoes what you've all said. I mean, I think it's to have a strong business voice to say that we know that there are solutions, that clear policy will unleash innovation, that the business community will drive those new solutions in partnership with the public sector and other stakeholders, but to grow clean energy and do it in a way that's cost effective, that grows the economy and a very sustainable environment for regions, for countries, and for the world. And we're here to help make that happen and to look for partnerships around the world to do it as well. And I think great evidence from all of you that contributes to that. So thank you all. Join me in thanking the panel. Great discussion on technology and innovation. And we are managing our timeline, so we're going to move ahead directly to the third panel on the role of finance. If I can ask them to come up here and... Whoops, let me back this up to... someone else is doing it. We have two people.
Finance, the deals don't happen and the deals don't move forward. And even if you're talking about at the household level or at the grid level, the deals can't move forward. My name's Andy Herskowitz. I'm the coordinator of Power Africa, President Obama's initiative to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. And it was great to hear from the last panelist, who I think didn't even realize that they're Power Africa partners. Our colleague who is about to go to Liberia, that's a Power Africa project. So for our esteemed panelists here right now, who probably are less familiar with Power Africa, most of their work has been in the United States. They may get some curveball questions from me at the end after they give their presentations to see what can we learn as we're working in developing markets about what lessons can be learned, what's replicable, what's scalable, what can be transferred there as well. So we have Mark Barnett, who is the co-chair of the law firm Foley Hoag's Energy and Clean Tech Industry Group. We have Dan Lashoff, the COO of Next Gen Climate America, and we have Dan Esty, who is a professor of environmental law and policy at Yale University, and who also was the head of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan Esty for a few remarks.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I thought I would just share a perspective as someone who 20 years ago served on the U.S. negotiating team that set up the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the perspective is this. I think we have in Paris this week a chance to make the greatest step forward in addressing climate change since that original Framework Convention of 1992. And I say that because of, in fact, what's going on here and all around that blue zone, and not just what's going on in the blue zone. I think we really have seen a transformed perspective on what it's going to take to bring about a successful response to climate change. And the key to that is innovation, not only in technology, but in how we think about the problem, and in particular, how we finance the response to climate change. And I think the big story here this week is a spirit of broader engagement. You heard it from several of the prior panelists. We saw it yesterday at City Hall, where 900 mayors, governors, premiers, and local government leaders gathered at the request of Paris Mayor Hidalgo to demonstrate that there's a lot of action going on, not just at the national level, but at the state and local levels, and frankly, to Peter Rothstein's point earlier, at the corporate level. So I think we really see a whole lot of folks stepping up to solving the problem of climate change in many, many different ways. And from my point of view, one of the critical factors for all of us is whether we can bring that same spirit of innovation to the finance of energy efficiency and renewable energy. And in my tenure in Connecticut as Commissioner of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, we tried to do that in a number of ways, most notably setting up a green bank to flow much greater resources to our energy deployment projects, and a variety of policy innovations beyond that, including reverse auctions that delivered up power purchase agreements to the winners, and a whole set of incentives to both drive up the level of project deployment on energy efficiency and renewables and drive down costs. Governor Malloy's mantra was cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy, and I think innovations in finance are a key to delivering on that promise.
Great, thank you. Turn it over to Dan Lashoff.
Thanks very much. So I agree very much with Dan Esty. I'm very excited about what's happening in Paris, and one of the reasons is that I think we're really starting to talk about not just what it takes to make the first step on climate change, and in doing this for a long time, there have been way too many first steps that haven't led to the next steps and to actually moving forward. But I think we're now actually talking about what does it take to solve climate change, decarbonization of the global economy. And we wanted to look in the U.S. in particular at what that actually looks like and how much money would we need to invest to make that happen. So we looked at what we think is the most robust analysis, which was work done by the Deep Decarbonization Policy Pathways Project. If you haven't taken a look at that, look at USDDPP.org. It's a group led by Jim Williams and Jeff Sachs and others. And they've looked at several different ways the U.S. can get to more than an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. and in great detail at what would need to be invested in terms of clean electricity, in the transport sector, in infrastructure, in buildings. And we wanted to look at what does that mean? Can we actually mobilize the resources to do that, and what would the impact be on the macroeconomy? So we recently released a study that took the results of their detailed technical pathways and did a macroeconomic analysis. The scale of investment is truly staggering. This is just in the U.S. We're talking about over $30 trillion, with a T, $30 trillion of investment in clean energy needed between now and 2050 to solve climate change. And now, much of that is shifting investment out of dirty energy into clean energy, but there's still a need for a net increase in investment of over $10 trillion. And it's interesting to look at where that has to be invested. If we look now just on an annual basis in 2030, so that's a kind of time frame that people are really focused on, 2025, 2030, in the midterm here. On an annual basis, there's a need for $30 billion of investment in more efficient appliances and equipment that use energy in buildings. $120 to $200 billion of investment in renewable electricity. $120 to $160 billion of investment in infrastructure. And the most surprising thing to me was the biggest single area of investment that's actually needed to solve climate change is in the transportation sector, and it's what we all have in our driveways. It's personal vehicles. So $460 to $610 billion of investment in 2030 in advanced technology vehicles, whether that's electric or fuel cell. So we have to both get out of carbon in the electricity generation sector, but also make a very rapid transition away from fuel consumption, internal combustion engines. So the question is, if you're going to invest that much money, can you come up with it, and what is the effect on the economy? And the answer is really good news. The U.S. economy is a 15 and growing to $30 trillion economy. So coming up with these kinds of investments is actually feasible, and not only is it feasible, it's actually good for us. What we find is that these investments would lead to a net increase in jobs, over 1 million jobs in 2030, as much as 2 million jobs in 2050. It would increase the GDP by about $150 billion in 2030, growing to $180 to $290 billion net increase by 2050. And household incomes would also increase on a per household basis by something like $350 in 2030. So the conclusion is you do have to make a big investment to solve climate change, but it's something that we not only have to do, but it is something that will be beneficial for us if we do it.
Great.
Thanks.
So Dan, I'm going to come back to you, and I want you to start thinking about a few things. One, we're talking a lot about the United States and what the situation is in the United States, and that's quite appropriate here because the U.S. is one of the largest carbon emitters in the world, and we need to figure out how to reduce our own carbon emissions. But at the same time, you're looking at the continent of Africa, where I'm focusing, and there's an incredible push to build out the infrastructure and a big push to try to figure out what that infrastructure should look like moving forward and what lessons can be learned from the United States. And there's a lot of deal flow, and there's a lot of financing that wants to invest in those deals, but we can't get to the point that those deals are bankable. And we want to try to pick your brain a little bit. So start thinking about that. But first, we're going to hear from Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to pick up on what both Dan and Dan said and emphasize that the thing I'm most excited about here in Paris, in addition to hoping there's an agreement reached over in the Blue Zone, is that I think the challenge of climate change is an incredible opportunity, and that certainly Dan Lashoff just emphasized that opportunity. So I have the opportunity on a daily basis to work with innovators across the spectrum of early stage clean tech all the way through energy infrastructure, clean energy infrastructure, and I'm seeing innovations that I want to highlight. I really just want to highlight 3 just to get us started that I'm seeing that I'm probably most excited about. One is the development of something called community solar that we're seeing across the United States.
residential solar has grown tremendously from close to from really about 0 gigawatts to something like a gigawatt installed last year over a 10-year period. But 85% of homeowners in the United States can't put solar on their own roofs, either because they don't own their own home or because their house is shaded or some other reason. Community solar allows homeowners to be able to own a stake in a solar farm, but built at utility or small utility scale, which offers tremendous opportunity to take solar to the next level. And we're seeing financiers in the U.S. get ready or get comfortable with being able to finance this type of innovation. Now, the thing about it is it's still small. We're arguably only about 50 megawatts so far of community solar installed. But what we're seeing is this is perhaps, in my home state of Massachusetts, but also in California, Colorado, Minnesota, about 20 states across the United States, this is becoming the fastest growing area of the solar sector. And there's the opportunity, if you ask Green Tech Media, to go up to about 2 gigawatts of community solar just in the next 5 years. The second thing I want to focus on is something called program-related investments for early-stage clean tech, or otherwise known as PRIs. This is not a new concept, but it is new, focused on early-stage clean tech. The reason this is important is that clean tech venture capital was down 72% in the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year. And even in the first quarter of last year, it was only 4% of overall VC investment in the United States. So there's a real capital gap there in terms of being able to really fund the next generation of technology that needs to come online to really help solve the problem. And one of the innovations I'm seeing to help fill that gap, in addition, because we see some from the government, but it's not enough, programs like ARPA-E out of the Department of Energy. One of the innovations we're seeing is the attempt to really be able to unlock program-related investments to allow the $600 billion of money in charitable endowments in the United States for early-stage clean tech investment. And the White House just announced just a couple months ago new guidance from the Treasury that's going to allow this type of capital to be deployed more readily by foundations. And there's a group called the Prime Coalition in the United States that I have the opportunity to work with, as well as Jeff Chapin, who's here in the audience. It got the backing of some very large foundations that's seeing a lot of progress and seeing interest in this type of capital being invested. And the last point I want to make as an intro is the interest of very large pools of capital in investing more directly in clean energy projects. We're seeing large pension funds, large insurance companies, even sovereign funds really looking to see how can they deploy capital into actual clean energy infrastructure, which I think is a really exciting trend. We do need to see trillions of dollars of additional investment into this space to really solve the problem. And we're seeing now both nonprofit groups, but also private funds coming together to figure out how to get that money directly into the infrastructure, which I think is a very exciting trend.
Great. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Mark, and just ask you to predict the future a little bit, because you're sort of at the cutting edge, working in law firms, working with different types of clients, and we're looking at the model of Solar City, of people essentially, they're not owning the systems, but Solar City owns the system, and then you have people who do, in fact, own their own solar systems. Are you seeing trends that you think, what you think might emerge moving forward as the best financing options? Do you think we're in a very competitive market right now? I'm just curious to see what your insights might be.
Sure, a great question. I mean, community solar is definitely one of those things. We are also seeing people do want to own their own systems. You see even groups like Solar City offering solar loans now to people, which really, I think, simplifies the process and gives people a sense of long-term ownership. So that's in terms of a residential sector. We are also, a big trend we're seeing in the clean energy sector writ large is these vehicles, publicly traded vehicles known as yieldcos that were created by Sun Edison and others have, while they were very successful a number of years, the bloom is off the rose to some extent. And I think this again highlights the need to get the groups that are the more logical long-term owners of these assets, the big pools of capital, patient money looking for relatively low but stable returns, groups like pension funds, groups like insurance companies, groups, even sovereign wealth, to figure out how to get them into the space. There's a group called the Aligned Intermediary that actually Prime helped form and the White House helped announce recently, which Peter Davison, the former head of the U.S. Department of Energy's loan guarantee program, is trying to figure out structures, again, to facilitate the efficient flows of capital
into these types of vehicles, and we're seeing some real excitement around that.
Great. So going back to Dan Esty, I was curious, tell us a little bit more about your experience in Connecticut to bringing clean energy finance to bear, specifically talking a little bit more about the green banks and the reverse auctions. On reverse auctions, for example, what we've seen in South Africa, South Africa has an equal amount of megawatts as all the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, but in the last several years, they've added 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts of projects that are in the pipeline already built through of clean energy through a reverse auction process. Others want to replicate that, but frankly, they just don't have the capacity to do that. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your green banks and your reverse auctions experience.
So I think the key that we've seen, is this mic now working? The key that we saw in Connecticut was a recognition that real progress depends on using limited public resources to leverage private capital. And I think that same lesson applies in Africa. I think what you need to look for are ways to use the limited amounts of money that will be available, and it's true especially outside of South Africa, and it'll have to be used in a very smart way to bring private capital to bear. And I think what we found is that the 20th century model is really not very successful, which is heavy subsidization. And I think that's true, by the way, in the blue zone. I think the countries that have been waiting 20 years to be bribed into action to be part of the climate change response are finding that was a big mistake. The countries that set themselves on a course to develop their own clean energy resources are doing much better. And I think that's a real lesson for Africa. And I think we're seeing, by the way, a redefinition of what the burden sharing going forward is going to look like. We're seeing common but differentiated responsibility redefined more fundamentally around our common commitment to action. I think that's very fundamental to success. And I think what it means is that on any kind of a project where there's a flow of resources, and that can work for energy efficiency because it reduces bills, it works for renewable energy because there's power to be sold, there will be private sector folks willing to put money up. And the key, I think, from a policy point of view is to make sure that that money is positive about the marketplaces that it might go into. So I think the governments of Africa have a lot to do, but it's true broadly across the world, true even in Connecticut, in ensuring that contracts are going to be respected, that people will get repaid, that there is going to be transparency on the terms of the deals, and frankly, that there won't be corruption or other diversion of the resources that are part of the package. And I think that is a lesson that's good in every state of the United States and frankly all countries around the world.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the green banks and how the green banks functioned?
Sure. So the green bank is not a bank per se. It does not take deposits, but it does have a limited flow of government resources funded in Connecticut through our proceeds from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So we do have, for those who don't know, a cap and trade system in place in the northeastern part and mid-Atlantic part of the United States. We do have a price on power emission carbon, and those resources in part, as well as a service benefit charge on power bills, goes to our green bank. And the green bank then uses that money, again, in the spirit of limited public resources, leveraging private capital, to do a number of things to de-risk the opportunity for private capital providers to put money into solar rooftop arrays, a broader set of renewable energy projects, and energy efficiency. And it's the green bank that's providing the structure for those deals, and frankly has done, I think, a brilliant job in demonstrating the value of moving away from the 20th century heavy on subsidies approach to the 21st century focus on finance, really trying to bring private capital bear as the critical element of what it takes to ramp up the deployment of projects. And in Connecticut, we've seen the energy efficiency projects go up by almost tenfold, and renewable energy projects by more than tenfold in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think a common theme that we're hearing from you all and then from the earlier panelists is that there's not as much of a need for subsidies, and the subsidies actually can be more and more destructive, but that the private sector itself is driving competition, whether we're talking at the grid level or even in the off-grid space. So I think that's what I'm hearing.
Just one other thing I would say, the critical thing we found is you want to drive down costs, and you want to make sure that whatever program of government supports in place is not creating less competition and higher costs.
Right.
So more competition, lower costs, critical.
Yeah, and not choosing winners and losers also. So, okay, Dan Lashoff, I'll go back to you. So from your opinion, what financing tools can help really bring energy financing solutions to scale?
Well, I think there's a variety of tools, and I think the first thing is to understand where we have to go, which is why we've kind of looked deeply at sort of, let's make sure we don't go down dead-end paths where we're making maybe a 10% reduction in the near term, but it doesn't lead to further reductions. But, you know, one, and I don't know exactly what the instrument is, but one thing that really struck me from this analysis was the big surprise was this, you know, we're making a lot of progress in the electric sector, and frankly, the transportation sector is going to be more difficult, but it's achievable. But the fact that there's so much capital needed, but it's actually, you know, personal vehicles in the U.S. there, and what does that involve? And it's true throughout the sector, but it's just most stark there is you're substituting capital for fuel. You're buying a more expensive car that has a big battery pack in it, for example, and then you're paying much less to operate it. Solar is the same thing. You're substituting capital for burning natural gas or coal. Operation costs are almost zero. So it is a huge need. I think on the vehicle side, we really need to think about what kind of financial instruments would enable people to capitalize those fuel savings and bring those forward and make it more affordable to own the vehicles. And I think one model that's very interesting and we may see emerge in the transportation sector is sort of similar to what Solar City did for rooftop solar, which is more of a cell phone subscription model to transportation services. So moving away from having to spend all the money up front and necessarily get a full loan for the vehicle or pay cash, and think about transportation as a service. And I think if you look at the conversion of things like Uber, autonomous vehicles, and electric vehicles, you can see a possibility of a really transformative change in the whole way in which people pay for and use transportation services.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that's really interesting, and because where you started talking, Dan, I was thinking to myself, well, most people don't really pay for their cars up front anyway; they get a loan. But I hear what you're saying; it's financing the part that's the battery. But I think what's exciting and interesting about that is, I think I've studied the energy storage industry a bit, and what's clear there is that you need to merge different value streams in order to make these projects economic. And in a way, part of the interesting vision, and Elon Musk talks about this, but I think people have been talking about this for a long time, is, well, your car also becomes your battery for your home, and the battery for the home helps enable solar to become a much more dispatchable resource and not necessarily leave the grid, but to have much more dispatchable power at your home. And it seems to me like once you begin to link those dots up and you start to think a little bit more holistically about the energy system, that creates opportunities to get to the kind of scale. It's also obviously private sector. I mean, electric cars was no one was talking about it seriously, until Tesla came along. And people said he couldn't do it, and then this company has come along, and now all of a sudden it's exciting, and it's going to be. But I think that there's opportunities when you think about these value streams coming together for opportunities to finance to drive to bigger scale. I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could just add one thing, it also brings in thinking about the role of utilities and the new utility business model in this, because once you think about the battery as being able to integrate more renewables and the grid becoming a two-way grid, then the utilities have a role to play in helping to build out that infrastructure and maybe helping to finance in exchange for the ability to determine when that car charges. Because if you take a fleet of electric vehicles and you hook them up to dumb charging systems and everybody plugs in when they get home just at the time when solar is going off the grid and demand is peaking, it's a complete disaster for the grid. If you hook it up to smart system with two-way information flows and they're being charged when renewables are available, it's a huge boon to the grid. So we have to get that right.
Okay, I'm going to finish. We have to wrap up soon, but I'm going to finish with something. We're going to give each of you an opportunity to play Nostradamus for a minute. And I'll go first. Basically, what I want you to do is I want you to tell me tell all of us what you see, your prediction for what the key innovations are going to be in the next 20 years, whether it's financial or technological in this space, that are going to really transform the market and help us achieve a carbon neutral economy. And if I already have a volunteer. I was going to even let you volunteer while you think about it. But just to give you, so I'll start, and with a couple of thoughts about it. One, I see the innovations in the off-grid space in sub-Saharan Africa, because you have I want to call it a market of 600 million people who don't have access to power. It's also a tremendous opportunity for these companies to drive the development of super efficient appliances and also come up with really innovative financing schemes, because they're trying to really, it's equivalent of banking the unbankable, and people are doing pay-as-you-go models, and it's creating a whole micro economy. And I think that's going to really start to boom over the next decade or so. Just the same way as one of our colleagues was talking about cell phones, I think it's going to be the same thing in the off-grid space. But in financing, technology, who wants to go first? Let us make this an exciting end for everyone. What's your big prediction?
So I think the greatest prediction one can offer is that we no longer have to guess what the technology future is going to be. And that what we're really seeing is a flowering of innovation in many different places and ways, not only in technology, but in finance and deployment, in public engagement. And I think the real key is to set incentives up that encourage the flourishing of those many different ideas, and let the market play out over the next decade or two which of those options will produce the best path forward, lowest cost, cleanest future.
Great, thanks.
Well, I'll suggest that and I think this is not the magic term yet, but we'll call it the internetization of energy. I think what we are going to move to is a system that looks much more like the way the internet operates. So we built our energy system with central station power plants and then transmission lines and distribution lines to take power from that into houses. And I think what you're alluding to in Africa and other places that haven't yet built that system is they're going to start with distributed generation. But there's a lot of benefit from being hooked up to the grid. So I think it's going to go the opposite direction. So you'll start with distributed generation, maybe totally off-grid, and then the grid will build up around that. But it'll be a different grid. It'll be a smarter grid. It'll be two-way flows of information and energy. In the US, we have to retrofit that onto an existing grid, but that's what we have to do to make this work. And that means reintegrating transportation, the transportation market with the electricity market, which they're totally decoupled now. They used to be coupled through oil. We're going to get off of that, and they're going to be recoupled through electricity. And all of these things are going to be connected in much the way the internet operates without having a central hub.
Great, thank you. Mark, last words for us.
I think innovations in battery storage are going to happen faster than anyone thinks. I think it's going to drive electrification of vehicles. It's going to drive a renewable grid. It's going to enable microgrids and mini-grids, and it's going to enable personalization of energy, of people having more control over their own energy choices, and people wanting to invest more, and there's going to be democratization of finance as well.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I turn it back over to Peter. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Andy Herskowitz. Great job on that segment. And to Dan and to Mark, the three of you brought great insights to the finance topic as well. Thank you. And so for everyone here, we've packed a lot in the last hour and a half, and I think it shows that the amount of both diligence but capability that exists not only in the private sector, but our partners across the nonprofit, the university, the public sector, across various parts of the clean energy community in the U.S. We're all focused. We're really focused on building a great industry and solving problems that really have relevance to the entire world. That's why we're here this week. Let's continue the dialogue. There is a hashtag that's up here that will continue, so we can continue the dialogue both online and outside in the hallway out here. I know we'll all be around for a while and look forward to talking with you about what we can do together to keep growing clean energy and solving the climate problem. Thank you.